Hey, pastors, welcome back. And if we've never met, my name is Gavin. And today we are talking about a decision, your decision, the one that has been sitting on your desk and in your mind, living rent free for a long time, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years. And you probably already know what I mean. You probably already have in mind what that decision is. In fact, before I finished the sentence, before I even got into it, you began to identify what it was. It had surfaced in your mind. Maybe it's a staff member who needs to transition. Maybe it's a program that should have ended a couple of years ago. Maybe it's a campus that really probably shouldn't have been started, but it certainly hasn't gained traction. And now you're kind of stuck, at least you feel stuck with it. Maybe it's a strategic decision that made complete sense in 2019 and makes absolutely no sense today. Here is what makes this just so frustrating, right? You have the information. You've run the numbers. I say it all the time. Let's run the numbers. You've run the numbers. You've talked to your board. You've talked to your key leaders. Like you have prayed about this more than anything else on your plate of late, and you still feel stuck. So today, I want to give you a question that cuts through that stall. And I want to kind of go a layer deeper than I went on the blog today. If you read the blog, maybe listen to the podcast, we're going to layer this a little bit more in this conversation because I think there's a distinction that most pastors really never make. And it's the difference between avoiding a decision and genuinely discerning a decision. We're going to talk about that. And we'll get there in just a few minutes. Because first, I'd like to diagnose the problem. Like, why are you stuck? Because the diagnosis matters. Well, it actually might matter more than you think. Hard decisions stall for a very specific reason. And the reason is entanglement. It's a great word, entanglement. You hired the person, you launched the thing, you stood on the stage and you cast the vision and asked people to give towards it or show up for it. And you have a history with everybody involved, with the program, history carries weight. It's entanglement. And so here's what that weight really does. Emotion makes you human. It also changes what and how you see. So like somewhere along the way, you probably stopped evaluating the decision itself and started evaluating what the decision says about you. Like your past judgment, your relationships, what the congregation will think when the announcement lands. And really that's the fog. And every stalled decision sits inside of that. Pastors feel this more intensely than probably any other kind of leader. I mean, think about it. In any given day, you are a shepherd and a strategist at the same time. You're working on a budget while also preparing for a funeral. I mean, the people affected the hardest by decisions are the same people that you visited in the hospital, and the same people that you are in the room when their kids were dedicated are going to be affected by the decision you've been sitting on. And proximity is a gift on Sunday, but it's a liability on Monday when a decision involves someone or something that you really do love. So how do you cut through all that? Well, I'm going to take you back to a incredibly well-known illustration, a story, a real story that happened in 1995. You probably have heard it, but let me just say it really quickly again. The company is Intel. They're getting crushed in the memory chip business. And this was a really big deal because memory chips were the business that the entire Intel company was built upon. And, Japanese competitors were undercutting them everywhere, maybe even making better products. The losses keep mounting. And so the CEO, Andy Grove, he wrote a book, by the way, that you may have read before, Only the Paranoid Survive. That's where this is written about. He turns to a guy named Gordon Moore, which is his co-founder, and he asks a question. If the board kicked us out and brought in a new CEO, what would that person do? And his, co-founder said, well, they would get out of the memory chip business. And so Andy Grove, his response became one of the greatest leadership moments in, I guess, business lore today, right? He said, well, why don't we walk out that door, come back in and do it ourselves? And that's exactly what they did. Intel exited its founding business and bet everything on microprocessors, not chips. You probably know how that turned out. Pretty good. So notice something, though, about that question, right? It added zero new information. Grove and Moore already knew the information. They knew they had run the numbers, right? the question removed something else instead. What it did is it stripped out the entanglement. It stripped out the history and the identity and the sunk costs that were already wrapped in this memory chip business. So here's the version of this question that I would love for you to maybe put on a sticky note or put it on your phone somewhere. You just, put it somewhere. What would my replacement do? Now, again, this is not a new idea, right? To you, to me, I didn't make this up. This is from Andy Grove. What would a new CEO do? But in your case, what would a new pastor do? What would a new student director do? What would a new teaching pastor, executive pastor do? What would a new board do? What would a replacement leader do? And think about what your replacement brings to your hardest decisions, right? They don't bring memory of the launched service. There is no name on the vision document for them. There's no relational debt. I mean, there's no sunk cost. It wasn't their cost. There's no reputation that's tied to that original decision. I mean, your replacement would look at your stalled ministry or that stalled decision, and they would just see a stalled decision. They would just see a stalled ministry. They would look at an underperforming staff member, and you know what they would see? They would see a role and a gap and the cost of another year of hoping this person would get their act together. They would decide in the first 90 days or maybe less what you have been circling for a year. Listen, when I first got into ministry, I got to help, I left the business marketplace. I got to help start a church in Peachtree City, Georgia. Shout out to Southside Church. Chris Patton gave me a shot. Love him for that. When I began to work with Chris at Southside Church, I did that for 2.5 years before I began interviewing to become a lead pastor. And the church that I went to, Watermark Church, that became Woodstock City Church eventually, Watermark Church was a dying church. We had $400 in the bank my first Sunday. So when I got there, there were lots of decisions that needed to be made immediately. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of those decisions, none of those decisions appeared the day that I appeared. All of those decisions had been there for years, for months, for a long time. And the previous leader is an amazing person who knew that he didn't want to be a lead pastor long-term and didn't want the new lead pastor to inherit decisions that he made. And so he just didn't make a lot of the decisions because he didn't want me to inherit them later. But by not making a decision, that's actually making a decision. And we've talked about that before. And so when I got there, we didn't have time for new information. We didn't have time to figure out what to do. We had to do it. And we were able to act immediately. And I think in hindsight, I can see it so clearly. The number one reason is because I just didn't have the entanglements. I moved an hour north from south side of Atlanta to the north side of Atlanta. I walked into this church situation having met the staff a couple of times, but I had no relational entanglements, no financial entanglements with them. We had one with the bank. We had $400, but as you can imagine, right? None of the emotional entanglements were a problem for me because I didn't have the proximity for it. So we just did what we needed to do because I was the replacement in that case. So what would your replacement do? I hope that you can sit in that and let it bother you for a minute thinking about what your replacement would do, because the clarity probably already does exist, and you might be standing between it and that decision. Now, let me give you kind of one more thing, the second layer I want to go a little deeper on, because here's what I imagine. Some of you are probably listening and you're thinking, Gavin, I'm still praying through this. Like, I am discerning, and I love that. I want to honor that. You should be doing that as a pastor, as a leader of any kind. You should be doing that because discernment is real and it matters. But I mean this with all love and respect and kindness. I have coached enough pastors at this point to know that avoidance loves to wear discernment's clothes. Like, often times, avoidance is just dressed up like discernment, but it's not actually discernment. At some point along the discerning continuum, it just becomes avoidance. So let me just give you a couple of tests that you can maybe think about, and we'll wrap it up with this that may help you tell the difference. Are you discerning or are you avoiding? So test one is kind of the information test. Ask yourself, am I waiting on information that exists, that is still out there, that's coming? If you are, right, if you're waiting on, year-end giving reports or the results of a 90-day performance improvement plan, that is discernment. And there's real input arriving on a real date. And that is going to be good information to take into the discerning process. If you're, waiting to feel more certain, that's avoidance because the feeling is never coming, right? If you're waiting for information that you know is on the way, that's fine. If you're waiting to feel something different, well, that's probably more like avoidance. Okay. The second test is really a calendar test. Real discernment has an end date on it. Like you can say, I am praying through this until the end of the month, and then I'm going to make a decision. Now, it may feel to you unspiritual to put a timeline on it, but again, I don't want to make this unspiritual at all, but I also believe the Holy Spirit doesn't need 5 months sometimes to tell us what he can tell you in 5 minutes if we're actually willing to listen, right? So avoidance, it tends to renew itself, doesn't it? Like it rolls over month after month. It's like a never-ending subscription service. It's like a timeshare in your head. And that subscription that, you forgot to cancel, that's what avoidance is doing to you. So if your discernment season has no expiration date, you're going to eventually find yourself in an avoidance season. And here's the last test, the third test. I think it's the relief test. And this one kind of can sting a little. The next time that the decision gets delayed again, like, a meeting got canceled, maybe you canceled it, you postponed the conversation, you didn't pay attention to the new information you got because the information pointed to the thing that you just kind of don't want to do. If disappointment means that you wanted to move and something blocked you, then that might be that you are not thinking through it correctly. However, relief means that you're avoiding. Like if you're disappointed that you didn't get to have the conversation, that's a good sign. If you're disappointed that something had to be postponed or rescheduled or the information didn't get there when you thought it was supposed to get there, but it's still coming, listen, the disappointing feeling is a good feeling. It means that you are ready to move forward. If you feel relief that it got, postponed, that's a wonderful sign. It's a red flag that you are in a season of avoidance. So just run those 3 tests, on your stalled decision this week. And, listen, if you can pass all 3, keep discerning with a very clear conscience, and keep seeking the Spirit's leading and keep seeking better information if that's where you are. But if any one of those 3 tests, if you fail either one of those 3, I would tell you to have a hard look in the mirror and make sure that you are actually not just avoiding the decision. We'll talk again next time.